Aloha, and welcome back to the 8th and final episode of Season 2, Talk Story with House Majority. My name is Della Albaladi, and I serve as the House Majority Leader for the 2021 Hawaii State Legislature. First off, today is the day after the last day of the 2021 legislative session. Let me tell you, I can't believe that we're actually here doing this, but I have two very, very special guests who will be joining me later on in the show to discuss highlights of the 2021 session. For our first community segment, I'd like us to visit District 28 with Representative and Vice Speaker John Mizuno. He took us to Kalihi Valley Comprehensive Family Services Health Center, where we were able to visit with his community and see a mass vaccination center. Let's go.
I'm honored to introduce our guest and a good friend of mine, Merlita Compton of Kalihi Valley Comprehensive Services. It's a federally qualified healthcare center. They care for over 11,000 people. The senior center cares for over 1,500 people. And Merlita, can you give us a little background about this wonderful senior center in Kalihi Valley?
Aloha, thank you for coming, and I want to welcome you to visit our Kalihi Valley. The Elder Center is one of the programs that we provide, and like Mr. Mizuno said, we serve over 1,100 seniors. We provide exercise program, caregiver support groups, respite, and of course we have providers that come and see the seniors here, and it's been great. And it's not only that, we provide the vaccination today. As you can see, we have about, I think we're gonna do 150 people today. So it's been very good. It's accessible for the seniors, and it's great. It's in the heart of the community.
Teresa, thank you for doing this interview. We've noticed that you're doing a lot of COVID-19 vaccinations today, and it's not only seniors, but I see that there are younger people also being involved.
Absolutely. The average here, we've been ramping up since we began in January, starting out with like 40 a day. We're now doing about 140 today, 143. We're looking at going up even higher as we get our numbers settled. Mainly about half today are first injection, but at least half of them are second injections, all finishing up. Mostly our kupuna population, we're really focusing on that. But we are having younger individuals come to the clinic for vaccines because the Kalihi Valley population, a lot of multi-generational families. So if there's someone who's vulnerable in the household who needs to have a vaccine and there are other family members there, we're going to take care of them as well. So you'll see all ages. We've vaccinated as young as 17 all the way up to, I think our oldest was 104.
Wow. Thank you so much for your service.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure to help the community. It's my entire life being in service.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yep.
So I had a question. I know you're with the University of Hawaii, I believe School of Nursing. So how did you come here to KKV, this Elder Center?
Well, it started out when the pandemic first really started to be a huge issue in Hawaii. There was a partnership between the Department of Health and the University of Hawaii School of Nursing. And they created a contact tracing program because it was realized that there were not enough contact tracers in the state. So they started this program, and I was in one of the first classes. They hit up a lot of specifically clinicians, physicians, social workers, nurses, nurse practitioners to go through the program because it was a compressed one. And so I began working for the Department of Health. And then it was the next evolution was coming into KKV because this was a very large area of high positivity. And so the vision was that KKV would begin an internal contact tracing program because they have people who work on staff who have all of the languages that are common to this particular community. So it was a wonderful opportunity to to be able to come to KKV and start this program. And now that the focus is switching over to vaccine clinics, then I'm helping with that as well.
I've noticed we've got a very diverse population in Kalihi Valley. Is there any group or groups of people that may have been missing the vaccinations, and as well as the news about COVID-19, and what have you done to try to address that issue in Kalihi Valley?
Well, Kalihi Valley has a very large population of Micronesian, Filipino individuals, and it's not their language barrier has missed in some of the publications that are out, and even some of the news reports. Because if they don't speak the language or they don't read English well, it may not be easy for them to understand. So part of the outreach that has been very important through KKV and many of the other federally qualified health centers is to go out to the churches and speak to the pastors and the congregations to be able to answer questions in the language that they're comfortable with most and be able to bring them in. And a lot of it is once we get one person in who is in that family and they see that the vaccine worked well for them, they feel better, they can go back to work, all of those kinds of things, then we have the opportunity to bring even more people in. So I begin to see one person that I recognize a family name from, and then 3 or 4 days later at the next clinic, I will see more family members coming in with that same name. And a lot of them are people that I recognize from the contact tracing, many of whom had positive COVID diagnoses back last year.
So it's a two-part. I guess there's a higher positivity rate in some of the races, the Pacific Islander races, Micronesian, Samoan, Hawaiian, as well as Filipino, but you've been able to break the language barrier and now you're getting them vaccinated. Is that correct?
Absolutely. At one point in time when I first joined KKV back in the August-September timeframe, the positivity rate percentage at KKV on any given day for COVID testing ranged from 40 to 60%, and that's a huge number. We had hundreds of people within the community, and this week our case rate of positivity, we had 15 cases.
Great.
So a huge drop. And I think a lot of it has to do with the education and the outreach and the fact that we're getting more and more people vaccinated.
So one final takeaway, we are more than a year into this pandemic. Is there one message that you want to send to the public and to the people in Kalihi?
I would say that vaccinations, come get them.
What a great job that you all have done. Thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you, Teresa.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure.
For our final episode, we're doing something a little bit different to reflect the changing situation with the pandemic in our community. So with me today, my very special guest is Speaker of the House, Speaker Scott Saiki. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Della.
Thanks for joining us. So we just saw a clip of a vaccination center in Vice Speaker Mizuno's community. Public health has been such a huge priority of yours. Can you tell me a little bit about what's been happening with the vaccination centers here in Hawaii?
Yeah, it's just great to see that project at KKV. That's exactly what our state needs. We need organizations and programs that are going to go into individual communities and vaccinate people.
Now, you took a leading role in setting up some of the larger vaccination centers here on Oahu. Can you share with us what some of the challenges were with that?
Yeah, so what happened was in December, a couple of days before New Year's, I got a call from Ray Vera at Hawaii Pacific Health and Jill Green at Queens, and they both said that they were interested in providing the resources to start up mass vaccination centers, and but they needed basically a state facility to do that. So we worked with them, and within a matter of about a week, we worked with them and identified a couple of sites. So HPH chose Pier 2 on Nimitz Highway, and Queens chose the Blaisdell Concert Hall, and they were able to start up their vaccination centers by mid-January, And it's just been a huge success because they are now able to vaccinate up to 8,000 people a day collectively. So they're both vaccinating about 3,000 people a day, 6,000 people total, if vaccine is available. But they have just made a huge dent in the vaccinations. And the other interesting thing is when we started our session on January 20, only about 20,000 people had received double doses at that point. But today, 102 days later, we're at 540,000 people in the state who have received double doses. And I think the Peer 2 and HPH's project and Queen's project really helped to increase that number.
And then what we saw happening on the neighbor islands was that we saw more vaccination sites opening up, modeled after what we have at Honolulu Pier.
Yes, because Queens and HPH have programs on neighbor islands. They also worked with community health centers on different islands, so they were able to expand. And I think it looks good. I think the projection is that hopefully Hawaii can be close to fully vaccinated this summer, midsummer.
So again, public health was really important priority for you. As we moved through the legislative session, there were things like safe travels, the pandemic orders. Any comments, any thoughts from you on either of those things as they developed during the legislative session?
Yeah, so I want people to understand that the House's position at the very beginning was that the health and safety of our residents was our top priority, that it was our top priority and it continues to be our top priority. It's health and safety. And and when you take that to the next level, that's really important, not just because people will be safe, but also because it will allow us to open our economy incrementally and safely. Once you have a solid public health infrastructure in place, then you're able to reopen the state.
So as we are seeing the state reopen, we're seeing numbers increase. Any thoughts on what's going to happen this summer as the inter-island travel quarantines and the governor's orders end, and so more travel will occur between the islands?
Yeah, so travel is, as everybody knows, travel is increasing really rapidly right now. Airlines are increasing seat capacity to Hawaii. There's so much pent-up demand from people in other states who want to visit Hawaii. So, again, when we started our session in January, there were about maybe 4,000 visitors who had arrived in Hawaii on January 20. A couple of days ago, it was 14,000 people in one day. So the numbers are increasing. We've made it clear to the visitor industry that they need to help play a role, a big role, in making sure that tourism reopens safely for all of us. That they have to make sure that the hotels, all of the visitor organizations, that everybody understands the need for public health protocols, and just reminding visitors that they need to be safe here.
Now, right at the beginning of the pandemic, Speaker, you started up your COVID committee that was really kind of critical in making sure that we had these communications and these consistent messaging. So what's going to be happening to your COVID committee now?
Yeah, so you're also a member of the committee, and so I think it was great because the committee brought together people from different kinds of organizations, different kinds of backgrounds, from different islands, and I think everybody who served on that committee understood that there was a common purpose, which was to see how Hawaii gets out of the pandemic. And I think that's why it worked great, because everybody was on the same page. Going forward, I'm thinking that there will be an organization in the state that will help take the lead on that, to continue that effort, so that the legislature doesn't have to do that.
And I think it was really important because, like you said, it brought people together from different sectors, but we could talk and communicate. And as problems arose, as there was confusion over the tier system, as there were questions about safe travels, it was really a forum to kind of air some of these issues. So moving forward, any more thoughts about some of the legislation we passed around, say, the penalty violations for emergency orders. Are you thinking that the governor is going to be signing those bills into law, and are we going to see some action from the governor?
Yes, one of the first bills that we approved and sent to the governor for approval was, I think it was Senate Bill 940 or Senate Bill 540, which addresses the penalties for people who violate emergency orders. Mm-hmm. But the law will do, if it's approved by the governor, will basically allow the governor to set the penalty within the emergency proclamation. So, for example, if he says that a violation of a face mask order should be punished through a traffic ticket, then he can specify that in the proclamation.
So it gives the governor more flexibility, but allows us to continue these public health orders.
Yes.
And the governor did announce that he doesn't expect that the mask mandate is going to come down anytime soon.
Right.
Well, again, public health was important, but another important thing during the legislative session was concerns about the environment. So for our next community civic segment, I visited with Representative Mizuno in a part of his district at the very back of his valley, Ho'olu'aina, where the community engages in forestry, agroforestry, land-based healing and education, food and native medicine, and Hawaiian culture and arts. Interestingly, KKV is the only federally qualified health center among 1,400 nationwide to care for a 100-acre nature preserve. Let's go check it out.
Kanoa, Scott, thank you for being here. Wondering if you can give us a little bit of the history of the park and how it's helped the community. Please, by all means, if you can share with us, and we just want to hear the story about 100 Acre Park.
Yeah, so the story of this place probably, starts way back. This place, since ancient times, was growing food and medicines for the people of this valley and people who lived near the ocean. There was that kind of barter system that was happening. So we always share the names of these places because that's really important for kind of understanding this place a little bit more. And Owawa is the name of the ili we're in right now, which is, an ili is a smaller land division within an ahupua'a. So we're in Kalihi. Owawa is the name of the place we're right now, and Malu'awai is just makai of us. Those are the two ili we take care of. And probably the more recent history of this place started in around the 1970s. There was a developer who had actually pegged to develop about 140 house lots back here. And it was really the Kalihi community that kind of took over going to the legislation and just trying to fight for open space. That started in the 70s, and it kind of became city and county land for a few years. And it was DLMNR state land. It started in 1997, but really there wasn't any kind of backing to support the programming here. So KKV in 2005 came, and it started with people just trying to cut back the invasive forest and really planting foods. The story that I've always heard in the beginnings was that actually in Chuukese, the language Chuukese, there's no real word for exercise. And so they're like, oh, what do you guys do to work out, stay fit? They're like, oh, we farm, we fish. And so that's kind of what this place was initially, opening up space for that. And it was the Micronesian aunties who you thought maybe weren't so strong down at the clinic. When they come out here, they could work for a couple hours, work you under the table. And they were the ones who were planting the early plants over here. And that's kind of, we've grown since that 2005. So yeah, those are some of that's how this place kind of came to be. And now we're here at 2021 and slowly expanding, just how we're growing.
Thank you. I noticed you've also got programs for our youth. Did you want to share with some of the programs you guys have, Scotty?
Yeah, we like to host a lot of the kids in the community. We like to share the knowledge of our ancestors in trying to heal both the land, the forest, and the community at the same time. And so we really believe that the health of the land and the health of the people are one. People forget we can't breathe in oxygen unless a plant has exhaled. And so I think just being up here with all this fresh air and oxygen and plants help people feel good. And so they don't get to harvest theirs, but they get to harvest what was planted last year. And then what they're growing will be what next year can harvest. And they'll start the crop for the following years. And that kind of takes them away from what I'm growing is mine, but what I'm growing is for the community. And it helps perpetuate that from an early age. And I really love that.
Very holistic approach.
Yeah.
Could you explain to some of us what are some of the medicinal purposes of some of the herbs and vegetables that you're growing?
So we have a lot. Turmeric, or olena as it's called in Hawaii, is one that helps with a lot of inflammation and bringing down that swelling. And we also have other plants like mamaki, which is a tea to cleanse the blood. There's also noni from other parts of the world. But we also have plants that help with mothers who are about to give birth and to help them after they give birth. And there's medicine all around us. If you get bit by a mosquito, we can pick the hono grass and use that like aloe, and it'll get rid of the itching. Or we have literally grass that's growing that will start clotting open wounds. And there's even, I like to give the eating tour, where this flower tastes like mushroom, but it actually helps you when you're feeling depressed and brings you up. And so I like the fact that we open up the eyes as to what is really healthy and what is really around us. And there's a lot. As a nature preserve, there's a lot of, how do I say it, rules that pertain to keeping native plants growing. And so we do allow the community to come. We kind of don't let them just walk around, but we do have opportunities throughout the week, community Wednesdays, growing farmer Thursdays, third Saturdays, where they can come, get educated so that they can go out and enjoy the forest without destroying it and actually help to perpetuate its growth.
KKV, along with you, partnering with this wonderful park, is actually getting between, you look at dollars, $3,000 and $6,000 worth of food and supplies distributed to many of our community members. How do you help, and what type of foods do you put in the care package for community members?
Our whole objective is to make people feel less scared and feel comforted during this time. And so we do a lot of comfort foods, canned vegetables, and we make the packs according to size of the family. And there's also fresh produce that goes with it that matches the size of the family. And we also do frozen proteins. And a little thing that has popped up was the community really wanting fresh water. And we were kind of torn between buying cases and cases of plastic bottles of water and how much we would need per family for a day or for 2 weeks. And so we actually started giving out Brita filters and everything from baby needs, diapers, to elderly needs. We try to provide what we can. It was unique because when the pandemic hit, the farmers also need to survive. And so through Roots, they were able to procure food from the farmer to help give out to the community. And at the same time, the food that was grown here was also being used to supplement part of that. Mostly, it was going to nutrition, which has our most diverse dietary needs. And so it's
Diabetic patients.
Yeah.
That's one of the silver linings of this pandemic,
Yeah.
right? We actually kind of reconnected to our roots.
Yeah.
Because of this. So places like Ho'olu'aina are top of mind here at the legislature, where natural resources and protecting our natural resources was a top priority this year. I have with me Chair Sylvia Luke of the Finance Committee, as well as Speaker Saiki, to talk about, very briefly, anything and everything about the legislative session. Sylvia, any thoughts on what we did for natural resources?
So, one of the things that we did was really taking a look at how we can transition from just the straight out tourism industry to a place where tourists are appreciative of our natural resources and our natural heritage. I think for the most part, a lot of people agree that pre-pandemic we were at 10 million tourists, and a lot of people agree that we don't want to go back to a place where we have 10 million plus tourists on a yearly basis. I think a lot of legislators know that even if we continue to have more and more tourists, the amount that they spend in Hawaii has not kept up with the number. So we try to transition to the type of tourists we want to bring to Hawaii. So one of the several things that we did was we had a parks management. During the Great Flood on Kauai a few years ago, one of the things that happened was the Hyena Park was completely shut down because of mudslides. And after that, the state took a step back and said, okay, let's take an opportunity to re-envision how parks will look like. So instead of having Hyena be overrun with just cars and tourists and even a lot of activity, and people would just park alongside the road and grassy areas and really clog up that entire portion. And when we took a step back, and thanks in part because the entire road was shut down, we looked at working with the community. They developed a system where the only way that you could get in is through a reservation and through a shuttle system. They put paved parking and you charge for parking. And so it was really a stewardship of that area because you limited the number of people coming in. And after that was established, thanks to the efforts of the DNR, even the local community who have not gone to that the North Shore of Kauai was really surprised, and they wanted to go back, and they brought families back, and it was limited access. We're envisioning something like that for all the parks around the state. Look at Diamond Head. I mean, the number of people who go to Diamond Head, or even Iao Valley. So we're doing and working with DNR, kind of a master plan and how we can re-envision parks.
This pandemic really put a pause on our travel. We saw tourism just drop, but then it was a relief for so many of us, I think, as residents. And I know, Speaker, you're supportive of efforts like this kind of managed tourism, dynamic pricing. Any thoughts for you on how we're going to bring back tourism both sustainably and safely?
Yeah, so obviously I think during the pandemic, because the tourist numbers were down, Hawaii residents saw more of our state. They saw more of the natural resources, and I think have a greater appreciation for what's out there. So one of the approaches that we took this session, which I totally agree with, is to assess more fees on tourists. And my feeling is that people who want to visit Hawaii should be asked to pay more because they use the natural resources and the infrastructure here just like everybody else who is paying for that. So the legislature approved a county hotel room tax, a fee on rental cars, and authorized the Department of Land and Natural Resources to impose fees at state parks. So I think that's going to help set a really good a base for us to collect more revenue from tourists to pay for their uses here.
So clearly I agree with that, but Chair Luke, can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's going to be really one of the big stories that comes out of this legislative session about how we're kind of restructuring the way we handle tourism. If you could give some background on the Hawaii Tourism Authority and the transition, empowering the counties to impose their own TAT.
Right. So it really is an effort to shift the burden from residents and taxing residents as compared to it's an effort to bring in more tax dollar from tourists. So before we go to HTA, one of the things that Speaker brought up is the rental car surcharge. Rental car surcharge, the amount that is generated from the rental car surcharge goes to the highway fund. The way that we fund highway fund is through gas tax. And so as opposed to increasing the gas tax and putting a lot of burden on our leeward residents or people who have to travel across Saddle Road from Hilo to Kona, as opposed to putting the burden on them, we thought, okay, the better way to do is put a surcharge on rental cars. So it's really shifting that burden from residents to tourists. For Hawaii Tourism Authority, for us to envision how tourism will be, it's really in trying to work closer with the Hawaii Tourism Authority and the industry to see what is the tourism industry will look like, not just in the next several years, but in the next 10, 20, 30 years, or even beyond. So one of the things that we did was we took the function of tourism marketing away from Hawaii Tourism Authority, and we embedded that into the research arm of DBED, so that we can, as policymakers, we can make a determination of what kind of research and what kind of fact base can help us envision how the tourism industry will look like in the next several years.
Speaker, any thoughts for you on how we're empowering the counties to maybe take on some more of the burden and actually take care of their own needs through their county TAT?
Yeah, so this is actually an opportunity for the counties to step up to the plate, because for years we have heard all of the counties demand more resources so that they can manage their islands and the tourism impact that they see there. So this is their opportunity now to make those changes.
So I really think that it was really important that we restructured government in this legislative session. Chair Luke, you're at the center of so many of these things. So just for you, maybe what are the top 2 bills that you think are really critical for this session?
So, when we first started session and when we received the governor's budget, I think it was really shocking for many legislators and people in the community that because of the lack of revenues and lack of funding that resulted in the governor cutting many of the social service programs. I think one of the heartbreaking thing was the sex abuse treatment center had about $700,000 in cuts, which would have forced sex assault services being closed on nights and weekends. And I think I said this many times on the floor, that we cannot ask sex assault victims to come back on Monday at 8 a.m. and that would not be a conscionable thing to do. And even HIV services had about 64% cuts, which would have resulted in one of the 2 Kona offices to completely shut down. And even TB assistance and services had devastating cuts to a point where Department of Health had to fire a bunch of people, or potentially fire a bunch of people, which would have resulted in 30% more cases of TB in the state of Hawaii. I think one of the things that did not get a lot of attention and highlight is domestic violence services. Apparently, the Trump administration cut domestic, what's known as help for domestic violence victims and other services, victim services, from 10 million to 2 million. Clearly, the state was not in a position to restore many of those things, and I think the current administration is trying to look at restoring that. But the state of Hawaii, we through our budget, we actually restored close to $1 million in domestic violence services. During this time, mental health has been a big issue, and I think one of the things that we saw was a lot of the kids, because they weren't going to schools, the teachers could not identify if there were child abuse cases, and to be stuck at home with a violent spouse is not a good situation, and we saw uptake in domestic violence cases, and we didn't want lack of funding to lead to lack of treatment. So those were the things that, these are the individuals who may not have individuals coming and lobbying for them and talking to us, but I mean, these were the individuals that I think all of us, Speaker, Majority Leader, and myself, we sought out to the social service programs and said, okay, what are some of the ways that you're being impacted? And I'm very proud that we were able to restore many of these very important programs.
So there was a sea change during the legislative session where we were able to restore many of these programs because of the federal infusion of funds that came in. But I know that there's a lot of hooks that come with the federal funds. Can you share with our viewers what some of those challenges are and what the things that we're going to have to be looking out to in the future because of these federal funds?
Right. So in addition to the amount that the state receive, Department of Education and University of Hawaii receive additional separate funds, but there is a catch in the receipt of those funds. If they were to receive the funds, we would have to maintain the level of funding for Department of Education and UH at the same level, proportionately pre-COVID. And that put challenges because it came at the expense of social service programs and Department of Health programs.
So maybe what some people don't understand is that even though there were federal funds, we still had to do targeted cuts, and that you really kind of did look closely at the budget.
Right. And one of the things that we did much more aggressively this year was we did look at all the unused funding from the hundreds of special funds that the state has. And this year, in working in cooperation with the departments, we were able to scoop about $100 million of unspent special funds, and we eliminated a lot of special funds as well. And I think that will lead to better accountability and transparency for the citizens.
So a lot of balancing things. It wasn't just that the federal funds came in. We really had to look at special funds, vacancies, and look at the requirements. So, Speaker, this is your one opportunity. We've got 2 more minutes, and we're here with Representative Luke. What are your thoughts on all the work that her finance committee had to put in, and what maybe we're going to have to do in the coming years around the budget? Because I imagine it's still going to be a challenge for us.
Yeah, the Federal Rescue Act funds are great, and we were so fortunate to have received all those funds. But those funds are basically a one-time appropriation to Hawaii, and we're going to have to start planning for what happens when those funds are used. What kind of position are we going to be in? Will our state be in going forward, and how do we make up for the loss, for the spending down of those funds? So there'll be a lot of work, but I know Sylvia is up to the task, so I'm not too worried.
You can't see him smiling behind his mask. Yeah. Sylvia, Chair Luke, any thoughts on us moving forward into next session, and anything maybe fun you might want to share about your friend sitting across from you?
Well, I have known Scott Saiki since we were, in our mid-20s, so that was maybe 30 years ago. And he had a lot more hair and black hair, but clearly this job is not an easy job for him because he really aged. But I always say he's always an old man in his young man's body, so personality-wise, he hasn't changed.
Was that recorded?
It's all live. So what I would share with both of you is watching you both at work. I really appreciate one, Sylvia, how you kind of manage this budget in this state and look at all the different ways that we can be innovative. Speaker, you've been very, I think, empowering of your chairs, and I think we only have maybe a minute or two left, but I know that we had chairs this session who did some tremendous work. Anything you want to share, any highlights for yourself? It's hard to pick one or two, but I know that we had chairs in the resources, water and land, clean energy, doing a lot of work. The housing committee, corrections.
Also on the economic side, housing committee has a bill that creates a mediation program for people who are facing renters who are facing evictions. That was a big deal. And then in our Consumer Protection Committee, Representative Aaron Johansson worked on a bill to reform predatory payday loan programs in Hawaii. So it's Representative Nadine Nakamura, Representative Troy Hashimoto on the housing side, Representative Johansson, and Representative Lisa Kitagawa on the payday side.
Chair Luke, any other bills that you want to highlight before we let you go?
Yeah, so David Tarnas, who is our Big Island chair, who chairs the Water Land Committee, he did a terrific job in consolidating Land Use Commission, Office of Planning, and OEQC into a new department called Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. And that's what we really need, right? Pulling together different resources and pulling together, breaking down silos between agencies and working on sustainable development. So we're very proud of the work of David Tarnas.
I'm looking forward to next session because I think we're only going to continue the work. But for now, let's go to another and our final community segment visit, where I went out to Wahiawa to visit the Ku'ukani Local Birthstone State Monument with Representative Amy Peruso. This is one of the most important ancient cultural sites here on Oahu. Continue watching to listen to Uncle Tom Lachenko explain its history.
Rep. Palati, I brought you here to Ku'ukani Local because we've been talking about justice and we've been talking about cultural dissonance, and our communities work to really address that cultural dissonance. And part of it is really going back to the history, like going through the layers of the history of this place and uncovering what Ku'ukani Local is about. And I wanted you especially to talk to Uncle Tom Lachenko because he is, I would say, the most important person in our community because he holds this deep knowledge about this place and cares for it and helps perpetuate and transmit that knowledge to younger generations. And I think it's the most important work. So I wanted to give him a chance to talk about the master plan that OHA has worked with our Hawaiian Civic Club of Wahiawa to develop. And that plan is so beautiful. It's everything we should be doing.
All right. Thank you for coming today and, trying to get a deeper understanding of cultural sensitivity, because I think that's the key to everything. It's where you come from. If you're not from here, we honor you anyway, so that you're Hawaiian, period. That way we make decisions as one family. When you look at the map that's just behind you, this is the map of Oahu. It was created in 1929 as a territorial survey. This is when the missionaries brought in specific individuals to go out and map the island of Oahu at the least. Yeah? So this actually gives an understanding from the time of Ma'ili Kuikahi, when he divided the island into the 6 moku that stand until today. The moku boundaries do not cross each other, so they stand alone. The only difference is the area that's in color, the red color. So this area here is the Aha'ulu Pu'uhonua Ku'ukani Local. It's 36,000 acres conservatively. Yeah, it goes beyond the mountain ranges, but to be specific in the spiritual atmosphere of Hawaiians, this is the peak of the center where all life begins. Yeah. So with that in context, they took the understanding from the heavens, which we broadcast as EO, the entire universe. So when you look into the universe in the evening, you see the multitude of stars. So in their vision, when they saw that, they brought that down from the heavens to the land here to be specific to the generational understanding that from this point on, generation after generation would be the ali'is. Yeah? And that way we will never be misled or misguided because of this spiritual connection. Remember, things are metaphysical for Hawaiians, so we get ontology, who are you, where you came from, cosmology, who made the world, who made the universe, and then most specific, I think, is Hawaiian epistemology, the theory of knowledge. So this becomes what we're trying to show here and hope that the OHA would support, which we believe they do. Yeah, and money changes things, but that's minor. But the spirit behind this is important because it is an educational theme. Yeah. But there are things that's going on that we need to be made aware of, that certain laws are in effect that affect international law, the laws of occupation, things of that nature, which is another story in itself. The people really are fearful. But we need to understand that the United States of America codified the Hague and Geneva Convention regulations within the system. So it is American law too. So they have to be responsible to that. Okay. Just as a note.
Side note.
It appears there's a lot of cleared land, and so what's been done to protect and preserve this place?
Well, it's protected under the state and the National Registry. Yeah. So we're still contemplating, is that important enough to continue, or do we need it? You know, if the OHA claim they own the property, maybe it's not necessary. What you can see here is the 200 length by 100 feet wide. This is the actual state monument, Kukani local bird stones. That's what we protect. It's in a remnant form because the walls that were at one time were completely dismantled and used for other things. These stones were brought in when we developed the property in 1994. We did a co-op between the state parks and the city and county of Honolulu. But a training program came in and had the operators go grade everything down. Put the stones in order to keep people from driving, you know, doing four-wheel and all of that stuff inside the site. So they have their protection modes. The two big pohaku that you see here, the tall one is the kane, the round one is the wahine, where all life begins. Yeah. There's a set on each corner of the site, north, south, east, and west. Okay. So there are 18 stones that on the left and the right as you go in. These represent the 36 Na'au Koa who have the responsibility to eyewitness the birth of every child. It's not the same guys every time because it's dependent on the family. Well, one is a dad and the other 35 are hopeful to become the first kahu of the newborn child. And when the child was taken, all that was necessary was now supplied by the communities to rear this child as far as health-wise. And then the education was done here by 13 kahuna who had the disciplines of role to now groom the child to be the chosen leader toward peace and prosperity forever. So for us as a Hawaiian, it's Kalahiki Ola, Kalana Ola, Kua Papa Nui. Kalahiki Ola, the coming of life. Kalana Ola, to grant peace and prosperity. And then Kua Papa Nui, never allowing our children, our family, our nation to know fear or distress. Okay, so that's the old way, which is very difficult for us because we're different. Yeah, we're not in that realm. I'm still in the realm, you know, but it doesn't count. Yeah. No matter how much I try to promote with the OHA, their draft is good, but it's a living document. It'll change. You cannot stand on that. We put ours in 2013. They took 3 years to come up with the 2016. So it's a living document. It'll change every day. Yeah, and you cannot just, but you said. It's not about what I said. It's about what is alive with us today. And our cultural education is the key. Without it, we cannot share who we are, and people are not going to understand why we're so explicit about the land. The land is primary. Yeah, Aina is family. Yeah, and for us, in closing, Ka'anani'au, a beautiful period of time according to our ancestors, and only we can make it beautiful. So each one of us has the responsibility to Ka'anani'au. Yeah, because when we leave, the next generation coming is looking for that alternative. Is it out there for them? Ka'anani'au, a beautiful period of time.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I really want to thank Representative Peruso and Uncle Tom for taking me out and showing me the birthing stones. Ku'ukaniloko is truly a sacred space. So sacred spaces were a topic this session when we opened in the beginning of session, and speaker, you set up your Mauna Kea working group. That caused a little bit of a splash. Can you tell us what's going on with the working group now?
Yes, so the House approved a resolution to create a working group that will focus in on proposing a new governance and management structure for Mauna Kea. So as you know, in 1968, the University of Hawaii received the master lease for Mauna Kea, and that lease is going to be expiring in the year 2033. So we have, some time now to plan for a new management structure because, as I said previously in public, the current system is not really working.
Now, part of the working group resolution called for people to submit their names, and you really wanted to have a diversity. And I know you're in that process, but how many applications did you receive? And do you have a timeline on when you might think that the working group will be comprised?
Yes, our deadline for applications was this past Monday, and we received 86.
Wow.
86 nominations. There were some duplicates, so when you take out all the duplicates, there were 53 individuals who are nominated for 7 seats, and these are the 7 seats that are designated for Native Hawaiian individuals. And we'd asked Native Hawaiian organizations and Native Hawaiian communities to nominate people for those seats. So we're going through the process now of reviewing the nominations, and we'll hopefully have 7 people selected in a week.
So, I think some of us were concerned that there weren't going to be applicants coming out, but it's really wonderful to see the community engaged. Something that members of the public don't understand is that the legislature really does continue work after adjournment sine die. So I know you've directed our chairs they have about a 2-week break. I think just maybe 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks. Well, you've directed some of them to look into some issues. So do you want to share what some of the chairs and what you foresee the legislature working on during the interim?
Sure. So the House yesterday approved an investigative committee, which will focus in on 2 audits that were done by the State Auditor's Office. The first one was on the Agribusiness Development Corporation, ADC. The second one was on the Department of Land and Natural Resources Land Management Division. So in both of those audits, there were several recommendations that were made. So the purpose of the investigative committee will be to go in, look at the audit, and see what the progress is and what needs to be done to implement those recommendations and other recommendations that that the committee may come up with.
So this really speaks to kind of legislative oversight of agencies and how we need to follow up on audits. In addition to the audits, I know that we have members who are very, very interested in the ALICE group and continuing to work on those issues. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so when we ended our session yesterday, I did let the members know in my closing day speech that one of the areas that we need to work on over the summer so that we can prepare a package of proposals for next year is on the on economic and financial fairness for Hawaii residents. So that's going to be a topic that we will be spending a lot of time on over the summer.
And I know that we talked a little bit about the COVID committee and maybe it being now overseen by Hawaii Community Foundation. But do you also see any more work continuing on the pandemic during the interim?
Yeah, the House is the one that has taken the lead in working to get Hawaii out of the pandemic in a number of areas, including the public health infrastructure. So the House is going to continue its work to oversee and to propose ideas for how we get out of this, not just on the public health front, but also on the economic and financial front as well.
And Della, if I can add something to that. So one of the things that we did during the last interim, as soon as we broke session, is, like you and I and Representative Johansson and Representative Mark Nakashima and even Representative Ty Cullen, Ryan Yamane, Henry Aquino, and a bunch of legislators and speaker as well. We went down to the unemployment office to help process claims. Clearly, there's still work to be done. So one of the first things that we will be doing is actually picking up where we left off. I think when we came back in session, one of the things that we saw was that there wasn't a ramp up of effort to clear some of these unemployment cases. So we'll be working very closely with Department of Labor to see how the House of Representatives can help them through this very difficult time. We appropriated $105 million into the budget to help the unemployment office to hire a lot more people. They are in the process of hiring 50 people right now. So as a public service announcement, if you believe that you are qualified, we ask that you take a look to see if you can apply for these positions. We are hiring, the Department of Labor is hiring call center individuals and adjudicators at this moment. One of the things that we will be helping them with is the ticketing system, so that individuals can get an appointment as opposed to calling every day, several times a day.
That has been a frustrating part about the unemployment process. Speaker, we're going to give you the last minute. Do you want to share with the audience any final takeaways as we wrap up this legislative session?
Yes, so, I just want the public to know that the House of Representatives, all the members of the House worked really hard this past session. They knew that there were a lot of areas that we needed to work on, and I think they succeeded in a number of ways. And they also know that going forward over the summer, that there's still more work to be done. So they are totally focused on doing that. And I'm looking forward to the next session in January 2022 when we can unveil more proposals.
Well, thank you, Speaker Saiki. Thank you, Chair Luke, for joining me on Season 2 finale of Talk Story with House Majority. I'd like to give a very, very special thank you to Olelo Community Media, in particular Keikoa Graham, Production Manager, Jonathan Wong, Director, and Scott Nordquist, a site technician who has been here with me for all 8 episodes of Talk Story this session. I also really want to thank my staff, Samara Tena, Morgan Painter, Najwa Kandrani, for all that they've done to make this show possible. Even though we're entering into the interim season, please be sure to keep in touch with Hawaii House Democrats. You can do this by following us on Facebook and Instagram at High House Dems and on our website at hawaiiHouseDemocrats.org. I am looking forward to being able to return with legislative updates and talking story with more guests. But in the meantime, stay safe, wear a mask, stay healthy. Mahalo.